On September 15th, 2024, the peaceful town of Powlett, Vermont became the scene of a shocking and brutal triple homicide that left the community in complete shock. Brian Crossman Jr., a 22-year-old with a history of mental health issues, was charged with the murders of his father, Brian Crossman Sr., his stepmother, Erica Crossman, and his 13-year-old stepbrother, Colin Taft. The tragedy unfolded in the Crossman family's farmhouse on Route 133, a quiet stretch of road that had never seen such violence before. Powlett is a small town with a population of just over 1,500 people, located in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Known for its beautiful landscapes, close-knit community, and small-town charm, the town never experienced violent crime. The murders shocked the residents, many of whom knew the victims personally. Brian Sr., a respected local figure, had been elected to the Powlett Select Board just 6 months earlier, and his wife Erica was known for her friendly nature and active involvement in community events. Their son, Colin, was a student at a local middle school, loved by classmates and teachers alike. This case gained national attention, not only because of its brutality, but also due to the fact that Brian Jr.'s mental health issues were well known within the family. The Crossman family had sought help for him on multiple occasions, but he had become increasingly unstable in the years leading up to the killings. Today, we will explore the events that led to the Vermont Family Massacre, the day of the massacre, the investigation that followed, and the aftermath. Stay with me. Part 1. The background. The Crossman family had long been a part of the small Powlett community. Brian Crossman Sr., 52 years old, was a well-respected man in the town. He worked for Green Mountain Power, an electric utility company, where he had been employed for many years. In March 2024, he was elected to the Powlett Select Board, a 5-member group responsible for the town's local governance. Brian Sr. was known as a reliable and dedicated man, committed to both his work and community. Erica Paulusiak, who married Brian Sr. in July 2024, had just recently become a part of the Crossman family. Erica was 41 years old and was the mother of Colin Taft, her 13-year-old son from a previous relationship. Erica was known for her warm personality and was active in various community activities. Her son, Colin, was a student at a local middle school and had made many friends. His teachers and peers remembered him as a bright, cheerful boy who was well-liked. Brian Crossman Jr., 22, the son of Brian Sr. from a previous marriage, is at the center of the tragic events. He has a troubled background, particularly due to his struggles with mental health. Family members later told investigators that Brian Jr. had been dealing with severe mental health issues for many years. His biological mother, who lived in Granville, New York, revealed that Brian Jr. had been in and out of psychiatric treatment, but was not taking his prescribed medication at the time of the murders. Over the years, Brian Jr. had displayed increasingly erratic behavior. Family and friends described moments when he would talk to himself, act violently, or display disturbing signs of mental instability. His relationship with his father became strained as these issues worsened. At one point, a family friend recalled that Brian Jr. had made threats against his father, saying that one day he would kill him. These alarming signs, however, did not lead to any significant intervention at the time. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Erica confided in a family friend that she felt unsafe around Brian Jr. She was particularly anxious about being alone with him when her husband was away for work, especially on nights when Brian Sr. was on call for his job with Green Mountain Power. Despite these concerns, no immediate steps were taken to address the tensions within the family. On the weekend of the murders, Brian Jr. had gone to stay with his father and stepmother in Powlett while his biological mother was away. What started as a regular family visit quickly escalated into a catastrophic event that no one could have predicted. Part 2. The day of the attack. The killings started in the early hours of September 15, 2024. The Crossman family had spent what seemed like a regular evening at their farmhouse on Route 133 in Pawlet, Vermont. Brian Sr., who worked for Green Mountain Power, was on call that night, a routine part of his job that often required him to respond to service calls at odd hours. Around 1 a.m., he returned home from a late-night job, unaware that his son, Brian Jr., would soon set into motion a series of events that would lead to the death of his entire family. According to police reports, Brian Jr. retrieved several shotguns from the family's gun cabinet, which was located inside the home. These guns were commonly used for hunting or self-defense, and like many rural households, they were easily accessible. Brian Jr. first targeted his stepmother, Erica Crossman, and stepbrother, Colin Taft. Both were found shot multiple times in their bedrooms, where it is believed they were sleeping at the time of the attack. Brian Sr. was shot near the mudroom, indicating that he may have been awake or trying to intervene when the shootings occurred. The police report revealed that his body had been dragged into the mudroom, likely in an attempt by Brian Jr. to move him, possibly intending to take the body to another location. Around 3:30 a.m., Brian Jr. made several phone calls. First, he called 911, reporting that he had returned from a walk to find his family dead. He told the dispatcher that he had no idea what had happened. Following this, he made additional phone calls to family members, repeating the story that he had just discovered the crime scene upon returning home. By 4 a.m., Vermont State Police officers arrived at the scene. They found Brian Jr. waiting for them in the parking lot of a local elementary school, which was near the family's home. His clothing was covered in blood, but he insisted that he was innocent, maintaining that he had only just come back from a walk and found the bodies. As the police began investigating the house, it quickly became clear that Brian Jr.'s version of events did not add up. Blood patterns found in the home suggested that he had been present during the attack, and forensic evidence contradicted his story. Brian Jr. had also attempted to move his father's body but stopped midway, leaving it near the mudroom. Police found the shotguns used in the attack inside the house, and there were no signs of forced entry, which further pointed to someone inside the home being responsible. At this point, the police detained Brian Jr. as a prime suspect. His calm demeanor and the inconsistencies in his story led investigators to believe that he had committed the murders. As officers pieced together the evidence, they found that Brian Jr.'s behavior had become increasingly erratic in the days leading up to the attack. Part 3. The Investigation. Once the Vermont State Police arrived on the scene around 4 a.m. on September 15, 2024, they immediately noticed inconsistencies in Brian Jr.'s story. Although he claimed to have returned home after a walk to find his family members dead, the physical evidence inside the Crossman home told a different story. Blood spatter analysis and other forensic evidence collected from the house suggested that Brian Jr. had been involved in the attack. The patterns indicated that he was likely present at the time of the murders, contradicting his statement about discovering the bodies after the fact. Investigators found that the murder weapons, several shotguns, had been taken from the family's own gun cabinet, confirming that the killings were not the result of an outside intruder. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry into the home, further pointing to someone within the house being responsible. Brian Jr. himself appeared calm and composed when speaking with the police, despite his clothes being covered in blood. When asked about the blood on his clothing, he claimed that he had tried to move his father's body to his grandmother's house across the street, but had changed his mind midway. This, however, only added to the suspicion against him, as it did not explain the full extent of the forensic evidence.
It's very hard to comprehend. It just hasn't sunk in. And we just visited the family.
The police conducted interviews with surviving family members and friends who revealed disturbing details about Brian Jr.'s mental state. According to his biological mother, Brian Jr. had been struggling with severe mental health issues for years. He had been in and out of psychiatric treatment and was not currently on medication, despite the recommendation from doctors. His mental health had significantly deteriorated over the past 2 years, with his behavior becoming increasingly disturbing. Brian Jr.'s family members were aware of the danger he posed, with one family friend even recalling that Brian Jr. had once made a chilling remark. "One day, I'm going to kill my father." Further details emerged about the strained relationship between Brian Jr. and his father. As investigators collected more evidence and heard testimony from family members, it became clear that Brian Jr. was the prime suspect. On September 18, 2024, Brian Crossman Jr. was officially arrested on 3 counts of aggravated murder. He was initially held in New York, where he had fled after the killings before being extradited back to Vermont to face charges. Part 4. The Aftermath and the Crossman Family. With a population of just over 1,500 people, most residents either knew the Crossman family personally or were acquainted with them through local events. The deaths of Brian Sr., Erica, and Colin left a profound void in the town. In the days following the murders, the Pollitt Select Board held a special meeting to honor the memory of Brian Sr., who had been elected to the board in March 2024.
The town of Pollitt will work to get through this, as we always have through hard times, by supporting each other and doing our best to carry on.
His seat was adorned with flowers, and a moment of silence was observed at the beginning of the meeting. His colleagues remembered him as a dedicated public servant and an integral part of the community. Local residents, shocked by the tragedy, began placing flowers and mementos outside the Crossman home on Route 133, turning it into a memorial site where people could pay their respects. Colin Taft, just 13 years old, was remembered by his classmates and teachers as a bright, kind boy who had a love for learning and was well liked at his middle school. The local school held a candlelight vigil in his honor, where students, teachers, and parents gathered to grieve his loss and share their memories of him. Many of Colin's classmates were left struggling with the sudden and violent nature of his death, and the school arranged for grief counselors to be available for students in the days and weeks following the tragedy. The broader Vermont community and neighboring towns expressed their sorrow and solidarity with Pollitt through various community events and memorials. The tragedy sparked discussions about mental health, particularly how it is handled in small rural communities, where access to psychiatric care may be limited, and the stigma surrounding mental illness can prevent families from seeking help. The aftermath of the murders also had a profound effect on the Crossman family. Surviving family members, including Brian Jr.'s biological mother, struggled to come to terms with the fact that they had seen signs of his deteriorating mental health but were unable to stop the eventual outcome. Some family members, like Brian Sr.'s first daughter, expressed guilt over not doing more to prevent the tragedy, while others focused on supporting each other through the intense grief. Part 5. What now? As Brian Crossman Jr. awaited trial for the brutal murders of his father, stepmother, and stepbrother, questions surrounding his mental health started. The legal proceedings officially began when he was extradited from New York to Vermont to face charges of 3 counts of aggravated murder. At his initial hearing, Brian Jr. entered a plea of not guilty, but his defense team hinted early on that his mental health would play a key role in their strategy. Given his long history of mental illness, it was anticipated that the defense might seek to argue insanity or diminished capacity, potentially claiming that Brian Jr. was not fully aware of the consequences of his actions at the time of the killings. The prosecution, on the other hand, built its case around the premeditated nature of the murders, emphasizing that Brian Jr. had access to the firearms, and his actions indicated intent, especially as there were no signs of external threats or forced entry into the home. The state prosecutor pointed to the forensic evidence, which contradicted Brian Jr. S. claims that he had discovered the bodies after returning from a walk. Instead, the blood spatter analysis and the condition of the crime scene painted a different picture, one where Brian Jr. had been the sole perpetrator. The trial, set to begin in early 2025, is expected to focus heavily on the mental health issues that had plagued Brian Jr. for years. His biological mother spoke openly about his struggles with schizophrenia and how he had refused to take his medication. She, like others in the family, expressed regret that more was not done to address his mental state before it reached a breaking point. Legal experts have suggested that if Brian Jr.'s defense successfully argues that he was legally insane at the time of the murders, the court could potentially commit him to a psychiatric institution rather than prison. However, the prosecution is likely to counter this by emphasizing the deliberate nature of the attack, using the fact that he retrieved the shotguns, killed each victim in their beds, and attempted to move his father's body, all of which point to a calculated act rather than one driven solely by mental illness. The case has already sparked significant debate around the adequacy of mental health services in rural communities like Pawlet. Experts have pointed out that mental health care in small towns is often limited, with few resources for families dealing with serious psychiatric conditions. The Crossman case has highlighted the warning signs that were missed or unaddressed, leading to a broader conversation about how such tragedies can be prevented in the future. Many in the Pawlet community have expressed concerns over the lack of mental health intervention before the situation escalated to murder. Residents have called for increased access to mental health services and better communication between law enforcement and mental health professionals. Community leaders of Pawlet are also considering proposing new programs aimed at offering support to families dealing with mental health crises before they become unmanageable. In the meantime, the family, friends, and neighbors of the victims continue to mourn their loss, and the community waits for justice. The trial of Brian Crossman Jr. is set for the beginning of 2025,